Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for the response. Welcome to the last open forum of the conference. I hope everyone has had a great week. Before we begin, just wishing you safe travels on your way home. For those of you who've been here the last few days, you probably know the rules, but for those of you who maybe are attending your first open forum, let me just quickly run through. We have 3 mics up at the front here. This is your opportunity to see if pose questions to some of our panel up here today. What I ask you to do is come line up behind the mics. Try to limit it to 1 question per person. If you have multiple questions, go ahead and get back in line. Gives your colleagues an opportunity to ask their questions, and then you can go again. We'll obviously go in chronological order, 1, 2, 3. Do me a favor, when you do come up to the mic, if you could indicate who you are and the organization you're with, that would help. And I think that's it. So with that being said, let me turn it over to the panel here and to introduce themselves. Robin?
Robin Miner, Chief Compliance Officer.
Pam Eliades.
This never works.
Swipe down. I think this is a setup.
No questions for Pam or Robin today.
Pam Eliades, Acting Chief Business Operation Officer.
Greg Martin, Policy Analyst with Office of Post-Secondary Education.
Anne Marie Weissman, Director, Policy Coordination Group, Office of Post-Secondary Education.
Cynthia Hammond, Assistant Director, Policy Liaison and Implementation, Federal Student Aid.
Craig Munier, Policy Liaison and Implementation, Federal Student Aid.
Misty Parkinson, Director of the Applicant Products and Customer Service Division, Federal Student Aid.
All right, we're going to begin. I see 1 person at a mic. This is going to be a really short session if other people don't come up. All right, we'll go to mic number 1.
Scott Sebring, Illinois Wesleyan University. It's really just more of a comment, but yesterday hearing someone talking about the PLUS loan and being able to indicate all maximum amount eligible, he was thinking, again, there was some change on that so it wouldn't be many people borrowing that much. My suggestion is when you put the dollar amount, could there be any way that there could be 2 lines for that? And one is you can either answer net amount or the amount of the loan you're taking, and then it populates the other area. Because we get so many times people confused on how much they think they're getting enough, and then with the processing fee, it's not enough they need, and then they have to come back and we have to make revisions, or they get too much because they miscalculated. To me, if it could be on the website when they're putting that, and they could answer it either way, but then it would populate then what the amount of the loan would be, whether they want the net amount or the actual telling them what the net will be.
Good comment, Scott. Thank you. Mark.
Mark Andrewitz. This question has to do with naming conventions, and I'll give 3 examples. There used to be an alias, collegenavigator.gov, redirected to nces.ed.gov, blah, 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 and that went away. And there are a lot of websites out there that are linking to the old URL that doesn't redirect anywhere. The second example has to do with standard repayment now referring to extended repayment. And it's on various department websites. It is used as a synonym for extended repayment because I guess someone intended it to be level repayment and then just started using the word standard. And the third example is the word Stafford seems to have disappeared from the department's vocabulary, even though the Higher Education Act in 20 U.S.C. 1087 A.B.2 and 1087 A2 both specify the name of the loan as the Federal Direct Stafford Loan, not the Federal Direct Loan. If you're going to be changing what Congress mandated, then why not have the word subsidized actually explicitly stated as part of the name for the subsidized loans instead of just calling it Federal Direct Loan? I know the history that originally there was just the one subsidized loan, and then they added the middle income or middle class loan the unsubsidized loan for middle-income families. But that's a history. It leads to confusion on the part of families when they see federal direct loan and they don't know what loan that's really referring to. Is it generically the Stafford loan, or is it just the subsidized loan?
Thank you. If you want to send me some of those things, honestly, send them to me, and I'll take them back and work them. Thanks, Mark.
Dr. Pat Watkins, Eckerd College, St. Petersburg, Florida. I am a little confused because I've heard two things this week. One, I know that in the regulations, it states that the financial aid office must offer the maximum student loans a student is eligible for. Yet I've heard this week that we can go and offer a lower amount with a caveat saying, if you want more, contact our office. What is the true requirement?
Hold on a moment. I wouldn't say. So let's start with the idea of the loan limits. They're statutory loan limits. So I would start out by saying a student's eligibility, the maximum amount of students eligible for is that maximum loan limit. Right now, you're looking at determining the eligibility for a loan. We can all go back to the first time we ever had to look at the first day in the office when they put the NASFA modules in front of you and said read. Right. The cost of attendance minus EFC. Right, and if it's a subsidized loan, EFC, and then minus EFA equals need. That is the student's need for a loan, not an arbitrary amount that the school decides the student needs less of. However, what we've said is that you're not required. When you package a student, we've not required you to package up to full eligibility. If you don't, you might have reasons for not doing that. So when you send out the award letter or notification to the student of his or her aid package, we've not required you to package up to the full eligibility, but you are required to inform the student of his or her maximum eligibility, what he or she is eligible for. And that is a statutorily prescribed amount that student may borrow. So I don't know if I put it in terms of offer. You're awarding You're awarding a certain amount of aid to the student, and you're informing the student that this is the amount you're eligible to receive. If you want to get the additional amount, you can request that of us, and we'll give it to you. I think it's been all we've said with respect to that is that you can't put any inhibition can't put something in between the student's statutory amount and what you've given the student, such that if I want the maximum amount, I have to be able to get it. You can't make me give you some schools have said we give the student a worksheet where the student explains to us why they need the additional amount. I have a real philosophical problem with that. Why they need the additional amount is what the calculation for need says. You can't putting that as an extra statutory, extra regulatory step. I don't know if I'd use the word offer. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm just confused because at one time, the financial aid office, and I have to say this was in the early 80s, many of us did not offer the full amount that the student was eligible for because based upon what their direct costs were, they really didn't need it to pay their direct costs. And several years later, that changed, and we were told, no, you have to offer the total amount that the student is eligible to receive.
So I think we've tried to clarify that we are concerned about schools who are packaging only to direct cost because all of the cost of attendance elements are statutory, and they are all equal. Tuition and fees do not have some kind of advanced or higher standing than room and board, books and supplies, transportation, and so on. So we are concerned, and we're trying to create a balance here between students who complain to us and say, I can't afford to stay in school because my school is only giving me the amount of money that I need for a loan that helps me to cover tuition and fees. So we have tried to say we're giving schools a little bit of latitude to say that you don't have to tell a student, okay, we're giving you this much money, this is how much you can get, in a way that gives them no ability to do some counseling that maybe you don't need this. Now, when I say need this, I will caveat that by saying because you typically are using average costs in your budget, a student may have a lower cost than you've allocated for an expense. So then they don't need all of the money because they've found a way to do it cheaper. So for example, if you've budgeted $1,000 a month to live, and that student says, I have an extra roommate and I can do it for $750, that leaves me $250 a month I didn't have to spend. Over 10 months, that's $2,500 that I don't need to borrow. That's a very different thing, though, than a school saying, we want to make sure you can pay us, but we don't want to give money for living expenses. So we've said you can indicate on your notice, award letter, school portal, whatever you do to award someone, this is the amount of your individual eligibility, making it very clear, not just these are the loan limits, but for this individual, this is your eligibility. We suggest or we recommend this amount or whatever term you want to use, but you're still telling them what their eligibility is. And you basically indicate a way that they can contact you so that they can get that higher amount if that's what they want. And as Greg indicated, you wouldn't be able to introduce additional eligibility requirements. So you wouldn't be able to say, you have to come meet with me to discuss why you need extra money, or you can't require a budget worksheet or additional loan counseling. You have to just say, you know, call your financial aid counselor or call the director or whomever, call the front desk and indicate the amount that you want.
Thank you very much. It's still confusing, and I understand the reason the department wants to reduce the amount of borrowing. And having worked at community colleges or with adult programs where the tuition cost was lower, many of these students are overborrowing to offset their living costs that are not directly related to educational expenses. And until we're able to just say, you can't do that, it's going to be difficult for us to get the borrowing low. To be quite honest, in 1974, when I started, the maximum loan amount for all students was $2,500 a year. Now a freshman can only borrow $5,500 a year. That has not kept up with the cost of education. Guess I stumped the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Not so much
Watkins.
stumped, but I guess what we would say is that the amounts are statutory, so they're not something that the Department of Education can increase, and that cost of attendance is set by the institution. So we ask you to set a reasonable budget for the student, for that group or that category of budget that you have the student in. And if that amount is reasonable, then I would say the student could not be over borrowing because they're only borrowing what they need for the cost that you've outlined that they need.
However, especially in private institutions, our costs have risen. We only usually do a 2 or 3% increase per year, and still we're approaching $60,000, $70,000 a year for a private school. Now, I am at a school that is that's younger than I am, and I'm 68. And we don't have a large endowment. Our alumni are still alive. We have to have them kick off a bit before we can get some more money.
Well, I certainly don't want to wish anyone ill or death. I can certainly understand your concern, and I know that we're not going to solve the issue today, but I do think it's something that we're continuing to look at and continuing to try to find strategies to help.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins. Mic number 1.
Hi, my name is Robert Bodie. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at the University of Wisconsin River Falls, also here on behalf of the University of Wisconsin system. We're very concerned, obviously, about Perkins cancellations and very much appreciate Ed taking the time to do another review about how to reimburse schools for the outstanding cancellations that we are still waiting to be paid for. Will the department, as part of that review, consider reaching out to some of the practitioners in the offices themselves, kind of reaching a little bit past some of our associations, because it is a very detailed issue, a very tricky issue, I think, in many ways, and I think you could benefit from the insights that some people at the school level could actually provide.
That is a great suggestion, and if you'll give me your card, I'll be happy to do that, and we can certainly look to reach out to some additional schools as well. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mic number 2.
Okay. I'm Laura McElroy, I'm from the University of California, San Diego. And well, first I want to say thank you. I really do applaud you. I hope everyone will, because for coming up here and getting grilled. I know we're not intending to grill you, but if we did financial aid this way, I think it would be hard to have the students come up at us like this. But what I want to say is thank you. And my concern is about something that was mentioned in the opening session about evaluating faith-based schools. And my concern is basically that obviously evaluating them for any kind of misconduct or need to improve their academic or oversight requirements would be fine, but I would hope that the committee that looks at that does not want to take away financial aid based on the topic of study. Because I think it's a worthy topic just as music or art or anything else.
Thank you, Laura.
Clem LaPietra, Monroe College, Bronx, New York. Just a question. I'm following up on what was discussed yesterday on the exit interview. It was brought up Tuesday, and you guys were going to get back to us yesterday, and it did come up. Can we get a clarification on that with the PDF? If you're mailing out an exit interview, in the past we were told that all you needed is to give a link to that, but yesterday you said something about a PDF. If we can get a clarification?
So that's one that the guidance currently is that is required, but we'd like to take it back and discuss it further and see if we might be able to make some changes.
Okay. And could I just one follow-up quickly on Greg's statement when we're talking about the annual loan limits and what they can borrow. In the past at this conference, we were told by members in the town hall that you can technically ask for an additional worksheet. You can be, and I remember quote unquote, I'm paraphrasing, it was said that you can have them jump through hoops, but ultimately you have to give them the money. That's not what you're saying, though, Greg.
I don't know, because of the fact that I don't know, I don't recall exactly how any of that was worded, but
I could tell
I don't know what the sense of putting somebody through a hoop when you can't, if you're making me fill out a worksheet to say why I need more loans, where it won't matter what's in that worksheet. If I want those loans, you're going to have to give them to me. I don't, as I said, I don't recall exactly what was said, but I don't think, members of the panel can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see the efficacy in putting a student through that, since it doesn't have any effect ultimately on what you're going to have to wind up giving the student in terms of a loan. I just want to say I wholly understand everybody's, the points being made about over borrowing and about, there are many times I 100% agree. There are times when students really don't need the full amount that they could borrow, even if it's justified by the cost of attendance, for lots of reasons. Anne Marie pointed out one of them. There could be reasons why their costs are lower, and it's probably in the student's best interest to borrow less. I get that, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about ultimately what is the student's, what is the student's eligibility, and what can the student borrow if he or she wants it. So I think that's where we're coming from.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number one.
Brad Reminga, Purdue Northwest. My question is for data for the 1920 federal shopping sheet. Would you be able to give us a release date of when that data is going to be available?
Hi. At this time, we do not have an exact date. We're working with folks across in Ed and NCES to get the data to populate it. We've been told that it should be soon, and there could be a couple of changes, minor changes to the template. As soon as we have a date, we will put some sort of notice out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Hi, Sylvia King from Oracle. Thank you for taking my question. With the CFH, the Children of Fallen Heroes, for 2021, will when the department sends the indicator as true, will they be setting the EFC as 0 officially, or is it still the institution's responsibility to treat that as an automatic zero EFC?
The latter. I believe we're handling it.
In fact, the Children of Fallen Heroes appears in the needs analysis section, and it actually uses the words expected family contribution shall be deemed zero. And the financial administrator doesn't have the authority to change the EFC, so it'll be setting a flag that will allow COD to pay the maximum Pell Grant in spite of a EFC that would suggest a lower award. Right? Did I get that right, Marie? Right.
Okay. So it'll be the original EFC, and then they treat it as an auto zero EFC for the maximum award. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. Mic number 1.
Hi, Melissa Hain-Loretto, Illinois Institute of Technology. Yesterday I had asked a question about exit counseling and was directed to ask it again today, so here I am. And my question was, our institution is pretty sound as far as initial exit counseling reminders, but we've had some debate on whether or not a follow-up reminder is due within 30 days of the initial notification. We have some people arguing that, yes, you do need to send a follow-up reminder at the student's personal email address or their last address on record, and then others saying, like, no, it doesn't seem that the regulation requires us to do so, and we were hoping for some clarification on what the correct action is.
So, yes, I would like you to go to the microphone and answer this question, please.
Hi, I can't answer your question, but I will get you an answer to the question by the end of the day. If you come find me, I'm right up front, so.
Sure.
We'll figure it out.
I am very sorry.
It's okay. I think you guys owe me like a Starbucks gift card. I'm just kidding.
I admit it, I did not warn him what the question was ahead of time, and I think if she hasn't gotten one yet, she deserves a, but first FAFSA.
Thank
You definitely stumped the panel.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa.
Good afternoon. My name is David.
Actually, can I address this
Hold on.
other question? She asked, how would the rest of y'all know the answer to this question? So we do have somebody who's been taking notes on what the questions are and what things we've said we'll get back to you on. And I think we're putting together something from all of the open forums, and we'll post it on the conference site afterwards.
Yeah. Yep. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is David Ochoa. I'm with the Making Waves College and Alumni Program. So my question is regarding student loan repayment and the programs that are offered. Has there been any talks in the works with the loan servicers to look to actual needs analysis when it comes to determining the repayment options for students? Just because different areas of the country, different cost of living. So they just look like, for example, the IBR, it just looks at 15% of discretionary income, but it doesn't take into account the high cost of living in certain areas that may make it maybe a little more affordable to repay student loans. I asked this just because the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Education mentioned that student loans aren't being repaid at a high rate or at a higher default, but to me it feels like it would make more sense if we have a loan payment that actually reflects the student and their family's current needs instead of a general income to household size payment option.
So that would require congressional change. There are some proposals out there now to look at the IDR program and what might be changed in that. I am not aware of anything that at this time in terms of what's proposed that would make that type of a change specifically, but they're continuing to make new proposals and we may see additional ones before any changes are actually made. But that would also be done again at the congressional level.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Number 3.
Peter Hurley, the University of Michigan. I'm here representing Alden Central High School. I have some real concerns about NextGen and the department's reliance on contractors. How well is the student data going to be protected? Has the department thought at all to post my FAFSA and my loan user agreements? When you download an app, the downloader has to activate it by agreeing to the uses and the rights and responsibilities. I think there's a lot of us in the audience that would like to see it, to know what the students are agreeing to. I'm not a big fan of the IRS, but boy, they hold on to their data doggedly, and they don't use contractors.
So I can take a first stab at this. There are opt-ins for both the payment vehicle and on FAFSA, whether you do it online or on the phone or wherever. You know, Dan was just up here talking about all the protections we have in place. I think we take PII protection we treat that as about the number one priority we have when it comes to administering these programs. The fact of the matter is, you know, we have contractors, and we, you know, that's who runs our systems.
Are those contractors subject to audit?
They're subject to security clearances. They're subject to audit. There's oversight. I mean, Pam, you want to?
All of our contractors that work for the department are subject to background investigations, the same background investigations that federal employees must go through. They are subject to the same accountability that we are as federal employees. They are also, all of our systems are NIST compliant. They have to have authorities to operate that is provided by our CIO at Education, as well as all of the data it collects is noted throughout different processes such as SORNs, federal registers, all of the things that make us governmental in nature. So we are very stringent about the security around our contractors and how they operate and how our systems maintain the data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mic number one.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is, well, it's loud, Aisha Farley. I am also an employee of Making Waves College Alumni Foundation. This may not reflect the views of the foundation I work for, but I was really curious on the comments made by the secretary earlier this week about the problem of student loan borrowing. We have, I guess, about $1.5 trillion in student loan borrowing currently, and I'm interested in learning of any kind of legislation that's maybe put forward or your office is working on to support the increase of the Pell Grant, perhaps above the $100 threshold where it currently is, because students are borrowing these loans because the grants they currently receive do not cover the full cost of attendance. And if you want to go to school, you have to take out loans and eventually have trouble paying them back. So wondering what action is being done by your office or congressionally to address this issue. Thank you.
So we are members of the executive branch, as you probably know, and we are prohibited from lobbying with Congress. However, we do work with them as partners, and we help them with technical assistance on many of their proposals, and we talk with them about the things that we hear and what we see and what we need. But we are limited in terms of what we can do to make some of the requests from the seats that we sit in that you're talking about. But again, we do partner with them. We work with members of their congressional staff, and we try to let them know the feedback that we're hearing from the community, including things like the increase in the Pell Grant.
Wonderful. I know you're not lobbyists. Do you know of anyone in Congress who's working on anything like this in terms of legislation? Are you aware of that?
I personally do not. We have members of our congressional relations staff that may have more detail on that. And again, work much more closely with them and partner with them and forward to us the request for technical assistance that we get.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Stewart. I work for Central Michigan University, a four-year public school. My question is regards to verification and conflicting information. We are seeing a lot of people who are married at the time that they filed their tax return, but filing head of household. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has this issue. We've had some guidance from NASFA that says that it's not necessarily conflicting information, as there are ways that you can accurately file that way. But we haven't really had any guidance from federally, just to make sure that at this point we're still confirming that and asking them to prove that they live separately so that we can show that they were eligible to file head of household, as otherwise that's incorrect filing status that we're required to have them fix. My question is that something we need to be doing? Because if we don't need to be doing that, we probably are putting people through a lot of hassle, especially as their tax preparers are telling them that they can file that way, and taxpayers are coming back at us saying that they can, and based on our understanding that they can't unless they meet those criteria.
I think what we've traditionally said in the past is referred you to, I think it's IRS publication 17. Then there's in fact, I think the EA that I'm thinking of, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the date of the EA, if Kara or somebody else remembers, that actually gives you the page number. That's kind of a, publication 17 is kind of a lengthy document. But we give you some specific pages that you can look at there that describes who is supposed to file, who can file head of household or not. And that is one of the things that you have a responsibility to do is we don't expect you to be tax experts, but we do expect you to validate that the person's tax filing status is consistent and accurate with the IRS rules.
So even though some married people can file that way, it is our responsibility to confirm that that particular family is eligible to file in the way that they filed.
If you have some reason to doubt that that's not the consistent tax filing status because of other information you have, then I'd refer you to that IRS tax publication, and you can decide for yourself whether they do or do not meet the IRS definitions for filing as head of household.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Clem LaPietra again. My question is on the borrower defense, especially the repayment rate. On Tuesday, the Secretary stated that 24% of the total borrowers in a cohort are successfully paying down their student loans, 24%. Why in the borrower defense regulations are we holding proprietary colleges at basically a 50% rate that they need to be paying down their student loan or their loans? I guess my question is, does that make any sense? I know, it's a regulation. The judge said it's got to be enforced, whatever. But if you look at it, the country as a whole of student loan borrowers are paying it down to 24%, right? So how do you justify that?
So I would say that what you said is correct. The judge ordered in October that those regulations needed to go into effect. The regulations were negotiated in the last administration. Right. We renegotiated them this year, and we put out an NPRM. And I know I mentioned it at another open forum, but I'll repeat it here for those who weren't here. We are writing a new NPRM based on the negotiated rulemaking that we've already done that would make changes to those regulations. And we hope to have that out. Again, if it would come out anytime before November 1st of next year, it would be effective July 1st the following year, which would be 2020. So I would say stay tuned for some changes.
Great. And will income-driven repayment plans be incorporated in that, the repayment rates? Because of so many of the income-driven plans, there's negative amortization there. So you have to look at that a whole. I mean, the past administration and even now really pushed income-driven repayment plans. Arnie Duncan was up here pushing the income-driven repayment plans, but that has to be looked at when you're putting these regs together for repayment rates. Am I right?
We have certainly received that feedback many times, and I will say that we are still writing the new regulations, and I think you'll see some change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number one.
Hi, again. My name is Amy Hooper. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania, and I am here representing myself, not necessarily the voice of the university. But I wanted to follow up on what conversations I've had with my colleagues here at the conference. Based on the Secretary's remarks, and I think my interpretation of how people are feeling, we are under, as financial aid administrators and as university officials, we're under a tremendous amount of pressure to keep our eye on how much students are borrowing, at the same time uphold the mission of the financial aid programs to create access to education. And I feel like our communication, the communication from FSA, from the department, maybe tending to go in cross purposes to what we're trying to do. And I mean that in the sense that we're really in between a rock and a hard place at this point, that we're sort of being vilified as these people who are pushing loans, or universities are the bad guys because they've been bolstering their tuition, or that's certainly the notion that we are profiting from student loan debt. And that's a very harmful path to go down. I know that you're executive branch members, and I know that your hands are tied in many ways, but I'm thinking from a communications perspective, how can we partner together to restate what the mission of the financial aid programs are, or to reinforce that, and as best we can point out a path to advocate for more Pell Grant funding, for more SEOG grant funding. I'm not saying we can bring back Perkins, but possibly a form of loan for students that will help them bridge the gap in their educational costs. Students are going to borrow all the money they can for a variety of reasons, and it may be to support not only their educational experience, but for the poorest students, they are often sending money home to their families, and that's part of the reason why we're borrowing. So I ask you if you have ideas about how we can collaborate as communicators to create a message that says access to education is important, that schools are not trying to cause harm, and I guess redesign this conversation about debt in a way that doesn't point a finger, I guess, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So thank you for that. I think we talked the other day about this, that hear you loud and clear. I don't believe the Secretary's intention was to point a finger, but to rather begin a conversation. And I think, she put it on us as much as she put it on everyone else in the thing. But we hear you loud and clear in terms of, as I said the other day, we try very hard to be sensitive when we communicate. We may have missed the boat on this one in terms of what we've done, and so we're happy to work with you to see how we can do a better job in the future.
Can I add to that?
I'm sorry?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I think also one of the things we would encourage you to do is to work with your professional associations, and in your case, continue to do that, to take those leadership roles and to work from that perspective as well. They're able to have a slightly different role than we do, and in many times they've been very effective in carrying out some of the functions that I think that you might be looking for. And certainly we work with them as a partner as well, and we'd like to continue to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Watkins?
Dr. Pat from Eckerd College. I am very concerned about the needs analysis system. There was a time way back when the colleagues, the financial aid administrators, would get together with their associations such as CSS and HCT to help design the financial aid needs analysis. I have seen the eroding of Pell Grant eligibility over the last years. For a family who's making $40,000, a mother, single mother, not be eligible for a federal Pell Grant. And I think that's atrocious. And is there any way that we can have input into how financial need is decided? Because we are not really assessing a family's need. We are providing an index where we can rank order people in order to see if they're eligible for the federal Pell Grant and other grant funds.
I understand, perfectly understand what you're saying, and the fact that increasingly grant aid over the percentage of educational expenses grant aid has covered has gone down, precipitously. But when we're talking, I can address specifically the need analysis formula. The EFC formula is in statute, as you're aware. There's no we don't have any regulations. We're specifically prohibited from regulating on need analysis. So there's nothing that could be done about the current need analysis absent legislative action. That's just a fact. But it's not to say that we don't understand what you're saying or have sympathy for that. But and you're right. Back at one time, that was the genesis of need analysis and of the formula was 8 professionals getting together and coming up. That's what it was based upon. And it may well, I mean, people could make the case that maybe it should be revisited, but that would be something well beyond our purview and strictly within congressional authority.
But the amount of the maximum Pell Grant, as has been said today, has not kept up. In 1983, I believe the maximum Pell Grant was $2,100.
Again, I understand that too, and I think we would. The maximum Pell Grant is set by Congress, and so I mean, all of that has to be done in that branch of the government. You know, and it's not to say that we're not sympathetic as to the increased borrowing and the lack of grant aid, but we don't have any. Nobody here has any control over what the Pell Grant is each year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins.
Sandy Sarge with Sarge Advisors. I have a question about the income-driven repayment programs. Was in the survey session yesterday, and it came up that there's been a significant drop in the number of students who are now in repayment and participating in the standard 10-year repayment option. And it went from like 55 down to 34 or something like that. So a pretty big jump over the last few years, which we would all expect. My question is, my comment is that somebody brought up the fact that they didn't feel that was necessarily a thing to be happy about, because ultimately the 10-year standard repayment is the least expensive way to repay your loans, aside from paying in advance, right? Prepaying. So I was wondering, do you, and I'm sorry if you guys already do this and I just don't know it, but are you required to, servicers to put forth a truth in lending type document for these repayment plans that clearly shows that this is what your decision will cost you, like you have to do with a mortgage and like credit card companies have to do? And given this whole conversation I just heard about that we're all financial institutions, I'm wondering whether or not that wouldn't be helpful so that it's a fully informed decision, especially with the point that we're now neg-amming these loans and adding to the principal balances. So, what thoughts?
So that isn't something that we're required to do now, but it is something that we are discussing. And I don't know if you'd like to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we are, it's a great point. We are looking at that right now, some of our standard disclosures, master promissory note, things like that, to make it more plain language, to put, you know, for example, like a Schumer box or something right there in the front, so people, like, it's crystal clear and short and sweet what's going on. They know they're taking out a loan. They know what the amounts are and things like that. So Dr. Johnson talked about that the other day, and I think we'll be seeing some progress in that area over the next year.
That'd be awesome. And then Misty can create us a cool tool that we can add all the numbers in and it can create it for us. She's the bomb on that stuff. So I love what you do. It's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Oh, one more.
Just want to add that that is available on studentloans.gov for students that go through the IDR. They'll see a lot of that stuff, maybe not exactly as you've said it, but it is there for them personally.
Thanks, May.
And I'd just like to add that Misty is the bomb.
Full concurrence up here. Mark?
Yeah. So I realize that the answer is probably going to be along the lines that Congress created the problem and Congress needs to fix it. But the question needs to be brought up, which is the disappearing asset protection allowance. You go back to around 2009, and the asset protection allowance for a typical family was around $60,000-65,000, and now it's around $10,000. And the reason is the asset protection allowance is based on the present value of an annuity, which would supplement average Social Security benefits at retirement to bring it up to the Bureau of Labor Statistics moderate living standard. That standard has not really budged much while Social Security has increased, and so that shrinking gap when you reverse it through the cost of an annuity, is causing the asset protection allowance to shrink. And if it continues at the current rate, we will not have an asset protection allowance in a few more years. So I wonder what the department is doing to advise Congress about the need to fix this problem.
You're right about one of the factors, but I think there's a couple of other factors. One, this most recent 1920 chart table that we released, also the gap, the asset protection allowance amounts decreased because of a fairly significant 2% increase in retiree and spouse of retiree payouts from the Social Security Administration, as well as a reduced estimate of the rate of inflation. And those were also contributing factors that narrowed the gap between what we anticipate the Social Security payout will be at age 65 and the moderate standard of living that you referenced.
Thanks, Mark.
Hi, I'm Alicia Cederberg. I work at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. We're a two-year school. I have a question about, I just saw my picture. I have a question about online enrollment. And clarifying for R2T4 purposes, there in the handbook it says you have to verify a student attended their classes. And for online classes, it specifically states monitoring to make sure that they log in does not make you a school that's required to take attendance. However, in the NSLDS enrollment reporting guide, there has to be substantial and consistent, something of that nature, interaction between the instructor and the student through the whole time of the course. So it seems to me that all online classes would be, situations where you're required to take attendance. That would be my walkout music.
We were thinking about that.
Okay. First of all, yeah, I probably my mind was drifting more than it should have been. The regular and substantive interaction is not related to. Oh, you know what I'm going to do? Turn it over to my colleague David Musser.
Can you put it in the form of a question?
I'm sure Greg could have handled this one as well. So the requirement for regular and substantive interaction doesn't mean that you have to interact every single day, every single week. The department has not defined what that means, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're tracking every single thing that a student is doing with respect to that interaction. In fact, you could have a class every week in which you interacted with an instructor, and you might not track necessarily that the student attended. You're not required to track that. Student school might not be attendance taking. So there may be schools that are subject to the requirement that you just mentioned because they do an excellent job of tracking every single academic activity that the student performs, and that might make them an attendance taking institution according to that program integrity Q&A that you just mentioned. But it certainly is not the case that all online programs are required to take attendance for that reason.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, David. Number one.
Hello, I'm Myra Vasquez from Virginia Western Community College. I think I'm just kind of trying to provide clarification on an earlier question or get clarification. Marital status, tax filing status, tax marital status. That's been an issue for many, many years. I've come up here and asked questions about it over and over. Can't control that because it's the IRS. But it is true that if you can't clear up the issue with the tax marital status, that the student is ineligible for aid. So I just want to make sure that's still true. So if they were married and should have filed married joint and married separate, they would not be eligible for financial aid if you can't document why they filed head of household. And my understanding is there's very few reasons, having looked at this, for head of household in a married family. The separation has to be separating because they are not together, not married, going towards divorce, basically. So I just want to clarify that all that is still true.
Yeah, I think if I heard you correctly, you're saying that you cannot resolve the conflicting information. Consequently, the applicant can't progress past that stage to getting Title IV aid, and that's correct.
No matter how insignificant the family thinks it is. Right? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Myra.
Good afternoon. I'm Charles George from Houston Community College. We're seeing an increased number of students that are coming from either homeschool or different private schools in the area. And it's not always easy for us to determine if those high schools are valid or invalid. Have you all thought about providing additional guidance to the colleges and universities in regards to invalid high school lists?
You're a little quick on the trigger there.
I'm not controlling
We're discussing amongst ourselves which one of us is going to answer
You know,
this
on television, there's a 3-second delay, and I want all 3 seconds. Yeah. No, first of all, the federal government is not going to produce a list of what constitutes, that's a state issue, and we have said that many times. So what is recognized in the state of the student's state of legal residence is as a high school credential, or it's recognized equivalent by the state is our response to that. And so we have no intentions of having a definitive database of eligible high schools, for example.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks, Charles.
So Laura Hughes from Lewis Clark State College. The theme of our conference this year seems to be our student loan crisis versus management of student loans at the school level, and whether the students are over borrowing. I guess a frustration for coming from myself as someone that's been in financial aid for a substantial number of years is that we know that it's regulatory, and we've been told year after year that it's regulatory, that we can't limit, we can't prorate, we can't, all of these different things for loans, put additional obstacles to determine eligibility. However, even in the presentation on the first day from the secretary, the comparison was made between the loan portfolio for the government versus ultimately consumer-based companies that had loans out there, saying that the government has the biggest loan thing. They're allowed to look at the whole situation and say, guess what, we're not giving you $5,000 or $10,000. While many of us understand the outcome might be the same, they might still borrow that. It's not about whether our cost of attendance is reflective of that, because my cost of attendance at my school, the freshman can borrow it, the full of $5,500 as a freshman dependent student, full Pell, and they're still not going to meet cost of attendance. The only thing in my arsenal from the federal level is to say, wait, your parents need to look at taking out a PLUS loan. And so we don't have any other tools in our resource arsenal to provide to these students. If they, even though we'd like to have the conversation, because sometimes maybe we could talk them into a lesser amount, or just say, have you looked at these options? I mean, so it's kind of frustrating that we don't really have a lot of flexibility, but we're getting our portfolio on a national level is getting compared to consumer loan portfolios that do have flexibility built in their systems. So it's more of a comment than anything.
So I appreciate the comment. I think part of the secretary's intent, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think she did mention in her remarks that the idea was to get the conversation going. And I think that her idea was to give you some things to think about. We understand that these are the loan programs, the limits are what the limits are, and you're going to offer them to the students who will then make their decision about whether they're going to accept them, ask for less, reject it, and you don't have a lot of control there. And we certainly heard that very loudly and very clearly, and we are going to continue the conversation back in our office as well.
So I guess my comment to that, for someone that, full disclosure, has been in the business over 30 years, the conversation has been going on for 30 years. And so it's still very frustrating that we don't have any other tools or resources. But even on the federal level, when we talk about education, programs like TRIO, Gear Up, all of those have faced cuts every year, or the potential of cuts. And so overall globally, as far as funding for meeting other requirements like that has already been expressed about access to college, and every student should have, or individual should have the option of coming to college, it's really hard at the institution level to be able to do that when you know straight out this student cannot afford to go to your school and may not even be able to afford to go to the community college down the street. So thank you for letting me comment.
Thank you.
My name is Ann Rusk. I'm from Colorado School of Mines, and my question is there a discussion at the department level as we move to next gen to update our language to more accessible terms? Like instead of entrance counseling, we have loan counseling. Instead of an MPN, a loan agreement, or repayment counseling instead of exits.
It's a great comment. Thank you. Yeah, I think we are looking at, we talked a little bit about this earlier, we're looking at all of our communications, whether they be online, whether they be through letters, emails, what have you, that we send, to try to make things more plain language, to be clearer in terms of what things are. The Secretary, again, talked a little bit about that the other day. So I very much appreciate the comment, and the answer is yes, we are going to be looking at that.
And then as a follow-up on that, is there, I know that we're going to be bringing things like entrance counseling and all of that to the app. Are we hoping to do that sooner than later?
Let me bring up my colleague right here.
Hi, thank you for that question. Our goal is to basically have some capabilities related to financial literacy around summer of 2019, whether that includes MPN or entrance loan counseling. That's still being designed, but our goal is to make sure that we deliver something that will enable schools and/or students and parents to be able to make better decisions based on their finances.
Thanks, KG.
Hi, Sunny Wallace, Boise State University. I just had an email from my colleagues back at the office, and they wanted me to ask, are we able to share the fact that a student is in verification with our admissions team, who then could share it with high school counselors who are helping students fill out their FAFSA and go through that verification process early? And is that under that umbrella of financial aid administration, and we can make that determination locally?
I think that's part of the FAFSA completion initiative. So if there's high schools participating in that, they can get that information via that. But I'm hesitating at the transaction the way you described it. I don't know, Jeff or Bruce, if he's still here, have different ideas about that. But yeah. Again, Jeff was just reiterating. FAFSA Completion Initiative does provide that information to high schools and other organizations that are assisting students with completing the FAFSA. But to do it the way you described it gives me at least some pause.
Because it's too much of a chain, too much information being shared.
Yeah,
okay.
And there's some people in the interim between the origination and the destination, if that's the right words, that it gets a little. I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
Okay.
And there are also some security, data security rules around the high school completion initiative, which is the other issue, is we want to make sure that anybody who has that data understands those rules. And as you give it to one person who gives it to the next, who gives it to the next, they lose that understanding of what the rules are and how you can use that data. So that's the other reason. So you should definitely have your school and your high schools in the area look into the FAFSA completion initiative.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks, Sunny. Mic number one.
Good afternoon. I'm Jonesy Anders from Northern Virginia Community College. Since Dr. Johnson first mentioned the debit card at last year's conference, I have tried diligently to see the benefit in it. And in talking with colleagues here the last few days, I'm finding I'm not alone. There is no fee for students, which is good. There's no fee to schools, which is good. So knowing full well that debit card companies are not philanthropic organizations, the money's coming from someplace. So is there a possibility that there's going to be data mining of charges, perhaps, and how that could be marketed? Or is it strictly going to be a government contract? If it's a government contract only, I can think of a lot better uses for that money, like an increase in Pell Grant instead of a government contract.
You want to do it?
I'm going to start, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is not being done as a government contract. The government is not paying any money for this either. There are very strict restrictions on what these companies can do with student data. They cannot use it for some of the purposes, the data mining and the purposes that you mentioned. The benefit for the companies is the branding, the use of the FSA name. And did I get it right? You want to add some?
Yeah, Cynthia's comments are absolutely correct. Every pilot implementer that will be applying to be a pilot implementer under this program has their own reasons for being part of the program. The controls regarding marketing are absolutely controlled by the customer. They're controlled by the student, the ability to opt in, opt out of marketing. There is no contract between FSA and the institution or FSA and the financial institutions. FSA is allowing this program to be for the benefit of the students and the no cost to students, and to the benefit of the institutions in the waiving of these types of retail transaction fees on campus as described in the Federal Register. So we're bringing the power of FSA to allow this program to be under project goals that are described within the Federal Register notice. And I would refer you to that notice to a demonstration of the benefits that we are requiring, honestly requiring our pilot implementers to adhere to under this program.
So there is a contract in a sense, if there are requirements.
There is a relationship between the institution and the financial institution, that is the schools and the financial institution, in much the same way as those relationships exist today for credit balance refunds. We are not recreating the process. Cash management standards regulate these relationships and how they're formed and the reporting requirements for them. Again, we're just allowing this to be in such a way that it is of additional benefit to students and provides a world-class product.
This would all be under the assumption that students are actually reading what they're getting into, right?
There's information that is provided by the schools, again, for these types of credit balance refund products already.
And I think that's an important point. Thanks, Charles. I mean, there are other products out there like this already. Number 2.
Hello, I'm Maggie Cafferty from the University of Idaho, and I had some comments from colleagues back home. We are hoping for increased clarity on the FAFSA around the sections that are for the student and for the parent. So similar to, say, the Parent Plus loan, where it will flood in the actual name, could we see something like that on the FAFSA instead of referring to student, parent 1, parent 2? So if it was my FAFSA, I would get into the FAFSA, and under the student demographics or dependency status, it would say Maggie's information instead of just student information, because right now I know that it is vastly better than it was before. I think if there could be some additional clarification there, maybe it would prevent the, superimposing the parent information back into the student. Financial information as one example, or on those dependency questions, it would create less confusion. Oh, am I supposed to be answering these? I'm the student. I don't have kids. I'm not married. Those types of questions. So that was our big question, kind of rolled into a comment. Thank you.
So we have tried different things over the years to try to address that, and we had a great opportunity when we were building the MyFAFSA component of the new mobile app to sort of start from scratch and try to create something that would address some of the, issues that we know that people have had. So the mobile app has the pseudo roles-based solution, which allows us to customize the language, which is a vast improvement over what happens on the website. The FAFSA belongs to the student. There would have to be a fundamental change in that, in order to truly go with a roles-based solution. But right now, the FAFSA belongs to the student, and on the website, we're asking all the questions as though it's the student that's filling it out, which I think contributes greatly to the confusion. We're very interested in seeing what people think about the change, about the different approach that we took with the mobile app. The roles-based solution is just, one of the things that we did differently there that, if successful, if we see improvements, we would very much like to, also do on the website. But we have done some usability testing, and there are some other things that we are doing on the mobile app to try to alleviate confusion. So in addition to speaking to you as the person that you've logged in as, whether it's the student or the parent. We're also looking at things as simple as, and I believe I mentioned this in the general session yesterday, the difference between sections 2 and 3 compared to the others. They're the only ones that don't specifically say who it is that we're asking about. And we fixed that, we enhanced that about a week ago. So in the mobile app, Section 2 and Section 3 now specifically refer to the student in the section headers, as well as like the summary of data. We're very clear this section is about the student, this section is about the parent. We also are exploring right now a way to sort of remind people what role they've chosen to log in as, because what we want is for people to be able to, in the instance of a dependent student, people to be able to sit down together, parent and child, and complete it together. Or be able to complete it together separately from each other, or student fills out the whole thing and parent doesn't deal with it unless they're using the IRS data retrieval tool, or when it comes time to sign, and then vice versa. So as we hear feedback about what we've done so far, we're seeing what we can do to make further improvements, and that's something we're tracking right now as sort of a reminder. This is the role you've logged in as. So in the event that they're sitting side by side, for example, and they lose track of who we're talking to, with the question labels. So we make improvements where we can. We are very interested in hearing feedback from anybody to help us know if we're on the right track. And if we're on the right track and we've really done something better here, then we want to go ahead and see if we can apply that to, to the website as well.
Thank you, Maggie. So we've got under 10 minutes left. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right here. If there are more questions, we'll try to get to them, but I can't promise at this point. Right here, number 3.
I'm Taryn Anderson from the University of Dallas. On the first day, Next Gen PPO was introduced and a little bit of it was shown, but there was no timeline attached to that. And I'm wondering what it actually looks like, what phase it's in, and when we might be expected to test it, see it, use it.
We hope to start rolling out some minor portions of it in 2019. We're just starting on it. When Dr. Johnson introduced Next Gen, the initial phase obviously was Next Gen Financial Services and focused on the students and the parents. So we're going to take advantage of what he described as the engagement layer. We can utilize that and adapt it to our interaction with the institutions. We also utilize some of the other layers, the security and data. So we're just starting now on what we're calling our middleware. And what it's going to look like, we're developing a school portal that will improve our interaction with the institutions. It basically will, one of the pain points we know that has been out there for a while has been the multiple points of entries and the multiple sign-ons. So the goal would to be have one central sign-on to get into program compliance, the business operations systems, and all of the interaction with federal student aid. So there'll be phases. Initially, you will be coming into one point and maybe being redirected to those other BizOps systems, CARD and NSLDS, but the ultimate goal is to integrate all of that. But we're looking for this year to at least have some of the, what we would call low-hanging fruit addressed, so like being able to do document upload and e-sign and some of the things that should have been happening probably 20 years ago. So as far as overall implementation, it will be in phases, but you should start to see some things in 2019.
It would be great if it was brought to the conference like the MyFAFSA app was last year, and we had a chance to play with it and give feedback before it was released.
That is our hope. We did have a focus group on yesterday to solicit input from some of the institutions in attendance here to make sure that we are capturing the high level. We know the pain points from all of the correspondence and phone calls that we receive, but we want to make sure that we are capturing everything. And we know one of the examples he put up was like the institutional application tracker. So we know that a key pain point is knowing where an action is in the process, when you can expect to receive it. So those are the type things we look to address. Establishing some standard timelines that you can use to operate under, realizing there will be exceptions. But we're capturing all the information that we've been gathering over the years and attempting to address it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Taryn. Number one.
Hello, I'm Chantel Harris. I'm from St. Louis Community College. I wanted to know if you guys could share with us how do you determine when to implement something as huge as updating the FAFSA website?
I do what I'm told. No, we have a lot of different people that provide us with new requirements, whether they're legislative changes or I guess I don't want to get in trouble, but like pet projects or regulatory changes, or, for example, for 2018-19, in order to be able to retain the IRS data retrieval tool, we had to make the changes so that, we were encrypting the data that transferred. So we have a lot of things that we track as things that we would like to do, and then we prioritize those with the other things that, we've been required to do for one reason or another. And then we just sort of surprise you with what it is that's going to be coming out next. But I do know that, the next gen future is going to result in, changes to everything that we provide, as a tool for our users, and the website is something that will very likely see some additional changes. But if you are asking specifically about the recent changes that we made, it was just time. We knew that we had users that were trying to complete the FAFSA on a mobile device, and we know that the population of people using mobile devices is growing and growing. And so we made that a priority because we have been, monitoring our user population, and we are trying to create tools and improve things based on what our population needs in order to be able to interact with us.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention was with the update of the website, it came at a very good time for all FA professionals, saying that it was about 30 days out from the start of most of our terms. So a lot of parents and students were very frustrated, and of course they were frustrated with us. And the only thing that we could refer them to is the website, which showed at the bottom of the screen that you guys were experiencing difficulties due to the implementation of the new website. So I guess I would recommend that if we can do things as large as that, like off-peak time, because 30 to 60 days prior to a start of a term is peak for us.
Thank you. We operate obviously within the constraints of budget and human resources, but also on kind of a funding cycle that sometimes doesn't align perfectly with the school year. So we get it. We understand. Thank you. Just real quickly, I'm going to go here. We're going to get to these last few that were here. If other folks have questions, come on up afterwards and we'll get to them. So go right ahead.
Kelly Liacano, Ashland University. So most of my career I've experienced working with high-risk students. I have a heavy background in financial literacy and default management. And I have more of a comment or a conversation starter. So I can appreciate the movement forward with the transformation and the making words more accessible, like repayment, counseling. And we're trying to make things more transparent on apps for students. But has anyone thought about the connotation of the actual acronym of FAFSA? So us as financial aid administrators sit with these students and they hear free application. And I know that the history was to say that there's access. The application doesn't cost any money. But students see that as this is I'm applying for free money. They rarely see it as I'm also applying for my federal student loans. And I think that as we're transforming this, FAFSA is a brand. I understand where you guys are. FAFSA is definitely a brand and we appreciate good branding. But for the benefit of students, there needs to be, as we go through this process, conversation and clarification started to the students as to what they are actually getting themselves into. And we live on acronyms and they do not. So I just want to start that conversation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mic number 1.
Billy Bozier with the Financial Aid Office at University of Texas at Austin. One of the things that I guess mainly I wanted to let you know is that Publication 17 contradicts the advice given to tax filers when they go to the website and explain their situation. For marital status, if you say you do not live with your partner, it automatically tells you to file head of household. Then when we get a hold of the file, we're trying to use different standards for the parents, and they've gone to the IRS website and done exactly what the IRS told them to do.
That's the first I've heard of that. Thank you. We'll take that back. Thanks.
Thanks, Billy.
Hi, Mark French with the Connecticut Office of Higher Education. The debit card concept, I think, has some merit. One question I have, though, is would anybody be monitoring what the refunds are spent on? In other words, if a student were to use the debit money to buy a ticket to, say, Daytona in March, would anybody block that purchase as a non-allowable expenditure of their refund because it's not educationally related?
That is not part of the pilot.
Oh, thank you.
So Amy and I are in tandem on this one.
Okay.
Joan Zanders from Northern Virginia Community College.
Amy Hooper, University of Pennsylvania.
Okay, so we were questioning why it is okay for the department to co-brand a debit card when colleges got slammed big time for doing the same thing.
Don't play the music.
So you have to remember the history of why we had problems with schools co-branding cards and how we got to the Tier 1, Tier 2 arrangements and cash management and everything. As part of this brand, they still need to, schools are still need to comply, and these implementers will still need to comply with all the requirements in the cash management regulations.
But how do we know that that co-branding isn't any less beneficial than what it was for the credit card companies before, or debit card companies before?
I think one of the big differences is you guys were getting paid to do that.
We weren't.
We were not.
Well, some schools, I will take that back. Some schools were getting paid to do the co-branding, and as we've mentioned, and Charles has mentioned, these card companies aren't paying the department any money, nor are we paying them.
So I just have one comment because I spent almost 2 years working at a brand development firm when I stepped out of financial aid. So I understand brand strategy and brand identity and brand champions and all of that language associated with it. And the concern is that, let's say a vendor, one of the big Visa card vendors now has access to all of these students and all of their mobile devices. For them, the reach and instant marketing is instantaneous. And I guess my concern is, given what's happened with Facebook and what happened with the past election and how data was shared and people didn't know about it, I just have concern about that. And I'm not here to lay blame on anyone. I'm here just to question what Pandora's box we are opening up with this.
I appreciate that comment, and as Chris mentioned earlier, we are also very concerned with data security and have put measures in place to make sure that any data that is provided is secured, it's used appropriately, that the student maintains control of what information is used, how their information is used.
And to play upon that, you're exactly right, Cynthia, and I'm glad that you understand the value of marketing, all right? That's been lost in some of these conversations, and FSA is, again, causing this program to be, but is not paying the pilot implementers, is not paying the financial institutions, nor are those entities paying FSA. And we are building into this the controls that need to be built into this so that the customers have ultimate control of marketing opportunities, opt-in, opt-out, which don't exist in current products in the large scheme of things. And so we're building into those protections on the front end of this product. And it is a pilot program. It is a test phase. And we want the ability to look at adoption using metadata only. We don't want the transactional data. The transactional data is the proprietary data of the customer and the bank. We're only asking for the metadata so we can see the adoption on campus, the adoption outside of campus. Is money being put on the payment vehicle? Is it only being used for credit balance refunds only? That's the type of information that the department needs in order to be able to evaluate its use and productivity in the marketplace.
Thank you all.
Unless a student opts out, there's nothing to prevent that company from marketing to them. Is that correct? For products other than something to do with financial aid.
As part of the pilot, we are looking at the types of marketing opportunities that the financial institution may want to market to, or the types of marketing opportunities that they may want to market to these, to the customers. And we will have discussions and controls over those to make sure that they are appropriate to the market.
Opt-in or opt-out.
Thank you.
And again, ultimately the control rests with the customer. The control rests with the students to opt in and opt out of those on a case-by-case basis. They are in control.
Thank you all very much. This brings us to the conclusion of today's open forum. Thank you again for all the wonderful questions, thoughtful comments. Safe travels on your way home, and thanks again for coming out to the 2018 FSA Training Conference.